Hello, thanks for joining us. I'm Modile Sharafa Yusuf, and I welcome you to this special edition of the program View from the Top. Along with insecurity, the state of the Nigerian economy has been a preoccupation of Nigerians for some time now, and especially since the advent of this new administration. And one matter that is causing a lot of disquiet is the inability of many state governments to pay salaries. The federal government recently stepped in with some emergency cash to pay some of the backlog of salaries, but analysts say this is only a stopgap measure and that the bigger problem is the size of the civil service and indeed the cost of governance. On previous editions of View from the Top, I've had the opportunity to discuss the many sides of this problem with some of my distinguished guests, and today on the program, I will be recalling some of their contributions. Mr. Folisha Phillips is chairman of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group and executive chairman of the Phillips Consulting Group, a firm engaged in business and management consulting. He says the current situation is clearly unsustainable. I had asked him how we can improve the existing structure of public service to meet the country's economic development goals.
The public sector is our own very sophisticated social security system, and I hope I don't get shot for saying that. But I think that to a great extent, people will tell you that certainly in my father's time that the public sector had the creme de la creme of society working within it, but things have changed now. And the reason why it has changed is that I think to a great extent, the whole essence of governance itself has been challenged by the prolific availability of oil revenue. You see, any country will always look after its people, its manufacturing, its industrial base, its productive base. It would always look after that because that is how it survives. I will survive from the taxation, from the royalties, and the kind of revenues I get from commerce and industry. But, and therefore I need to run a very efficient shop. And I cannot allow the civil service structure, public service structure, to exceed the size of the economy that I'm managing. But when the size of that economy is inflated simply because the volume and value of revenue that you get from oil comes into the system, there's this rather confused and totally wrong concept of how large the economy is, and therefore we continue to expand our civil service structure. And when you have excess supply, inefficiencies turn up, and people begin to sort of not work because there is really no great need to work. If we had to survive because our agriculture and our manufacturing and all those aspects of our economy need to really thrive, then you find that the government itself will be working so hard to make it happen because that is how the government itself survives, from the taxation and all the other revenues and so on that come to play. But that has not been the case. And each time I say this, don't forget, replicate this in 36 states and the federal capital. It's never just Nigeria. So our civil service, has been spoiled and has been funded. You look at our cost structure, it's significantly towards supporting government, and we're saying we don't have enough going into capital expenditure and so on. So there's a long history of that has developed over the years, and it has become a way of life and a habit.
A former colleague of yours, Mrs. Obi Ezekwesili, recently raised an alarm over the cost of governance. To what extent do you share?
I think this is a problem that has gone on for too long. The cost of governance in Nigeria is without doubt too high. Actually, it's outrageous. The problem was not just recognized today. If you read the National Economic Empowerment and Development Strategy, which I happen to be the chair coordinator in the drafting, the Obasanjo's reform agenda for his second term, we recognize that. When a chapter is actually on public sector reforms. Professionalization, that's when all these things about monetization, all the programs designed to really streamline, cut back dramatically the size of government. Then as a chief economic advisor, before I went to the central bank, I saw tens, DGs of tens of parastatals came to see me during the preparation of the 2004 budget. And that's what those were parastatals I heard about for the first time. And telling you about giving them budget. And I asked some of them, what have you produced in the last 5 years? Oh, they will give you an excuse, inadequate funding. I said, so in the last 5 years, there's nothing that the country would miss if you are not there. You haven't done anything in the last 5 years because of inadequate funding. So if the country has managed 5 years without you, we can as well do without you. You have these hundreds of parastatals that the country doesn't need. Just guzzling that. The cost of governance had all ramifications. I think she basically talked about the National Assembly. I pointed out that in my piece, a lecture I gave June 4, 2010 at the University of Nigeria. I made essentially the same point. The cost of governance and the National Assembly. If you scale it relative to the per capita income of Nigeria, what it costs on the average to keep a member of the National Assembly to work, relative to a country with a per capita income, if you share all the income of Nigeria among the entire population per person, you barely have $1,000 each. If you scale it by that, that's when you actually appreciate how humongous the cost of governance in Nigeria, the assemblies, the executive branch. I'm not just limiting it to the assemblies, but also the wider cost of governance at all levels. That's why the consumption part of the national budget overwhelms everything else. You can't transform the national economy with the chunk of the national budget that just goes into consumption. Where is the part for to build the infrastructure? Where is the part to build the capital goods? That is the bedrock. It's investment that transforms any economy. It's not consumption that transforms an economy.
One of the few things on which you and Professor Charles Soludo seem to agree is that the cost of governance is too high. How can we summon the political will to do the right thing? Or maybe I should start by asking, what is the right thing to do?
You know, we will do the right thing eventually. The cost of governance is too high. And should I tell you why I'm so confident we'll do the right thing? It's a matter of when, not if. What's happening is that the cost of governance will keep on exploding. It will keep on increasing. It will keep on consuming a larger and larger percentage of our resources until it will become obvious that this nonsense has to stop again. And then it will be the elite who will say no more. And you see, there's a reason why...
That time has not come.
No. What's happening is that we've patched the problem. If overheads and cost of governance and all that stuff is consuming 70% of our resources, and we succeed in bringing it down to 65%, some people celebrate and say, well, there's been an improvement, but that's still not good enough. What is going to happen eventually is that the rest of Nigeria will decide that why should some people who happen to be in civil service, who happen to be in federal government agencies, we know how some of them smuggle themselves in through their connections and their godfathers, why should they now get together and consume 70% of the nation's resources and leave the other 160 million Nigerians out there hungry? How long can this continue? Because when you talk about this cost of governance, it translates into a handful of people or hundreds of people using governance as the excuse for them to appropriate to themselves the bulk of our resources and leave the rest of us with the leftovers. It's a matter of time before, if those who are elected into office don't correct it, the elite will come together again and force them to do so, to make the corrections. It will happen. And you know what? Falling oil prices help to make it happen faster.
About 70% of what we have goes towards funding the public service, recurrent expenditure, and only about 30% is left for infrastructure and things like that. Do you think, we know this is not sustainable, so I won't ask you whether this is sustainable. We know this isn't sustainable, but do you think that government will have the political will to do what's right, and how can they do it?
Well, first of all, you know, sometimes political will is driven by reality. We are earning averagely about, I think, $54 a barrel or so, and when you look at the major source of revenue for government, it's from our oil revenues. And if you look at it from that point of view, we are not going to have enough money to sustain, I think, going forward, the level of expenditure that we currently have experienced in the country to date. So I think the new government has got a huge challenge of trying to see how it's going to restructure the system. Certainly, I'm not expecting the government is going to go laying off people. I don't know what the policy is going to be as far as that's concerned. But certainly, we're going to have to begin to hopefully constrict and reduce the size of government. So we need to begin to revisit that. That's why I keep going back to the legislature and saying that, look, what kind of new laws must we put in place that deals with the reality of this country going forward rather than a wish list. Now, what begins to as you say, shine your eyes, is where the revenue that you have to run government cannot sustain the size of government that you had before. And people are going to have to start thinking very, very quickly of how to deal with that challenge.